Hey, it's Rachel. I recently did an experiment with biochar and worm castings. It went pretty well, so thought I'd share it. A lot of times people will take this biochar and inoculate it by putting it in a compost tea. And I thought there might be a simpler way to do it. So what I did is I just added the biochar, which at that time is just char, right? It's not biochar until you actually inoculate it. I put the char straight into my worm bin and let the worms work it through. And the logic here is as it passes through the worm's gut, it will become inoculated with all of the good stuff that I want it to be inoculated with without me having to do a whole lot of work. So the big question was how to get the worms to consume it because worms, when they're eating soil, they aren't really eating the soil. They consume it, but what they eat is the bacteria and nematodes and little bits of dead plant matter that are all mixed in with the soil, and the soil just passes out the other end. So in order to get them to do that with the biochar, I mean, there's no food for them in this. It's just plain blank carbon. So I blended it, literally. I put it in my blender with their favorite thing in the world, which is bananas. So let me show you how I made this all work.
So this is my worm bin. It's your classic stacking plastic model, nothing special. And what does matter though is the charcoal. I used an all natural kind. You don't want anything with lighter fluid or anything like that. I just put it in a plastic bag. And as you can see, it's got really big pieces of charcoal here. So the logic on this plastic bag, I tied it shut really tightly and then I drove over it several times. And this isn't perfect, but you'll see in a second when I opened it back up, there are still some bigger pieces, but it's way better than it was when I first put it into the plastic bag. It does grind it down quite a bit. So you can see there's some small, chunks here, not as big as before, and there's some nice kind of powder off to the edges where it did get ground up as it kind of rubbed against itself and was crushed under the tires of the car. And miraculously, I did not burst the bag open. So I went ahead and put that into my blender jar here, added some water to help the blender do its job. And then let me show you, these are really ripe bananas, like really ripe, the kind you'd make for banana bread. I find that the worms really seem to go crazy for those. So took that, chunked it up, put it in the blender, and just screwed it on tight. This is definitely kind of blender abuse. So I ran this, it was loud. It definitely made it seem like I was doing something wrong. After one pass, I did, as you can see here, go and add a little bit more water. And I would say if you're going to try this, definitely make sure you've got a lot of water in the jar because it's hard work for the blender. So after I went through these 2 rounds of blending, let me show you in a sec, I ended up with a good texture. It's kind of like pudding, maybe a little bit thinner than pudding. I'll take a spoon and show you. It's a nice kind of thick, gloppy mixture of banana and charcoal, blended up pretty finely. So I took off the very top layer of my bin because that one is the active one where I'm still adding food. And then these 2 layers, I put about half of it in one layer, half of the goop, mixed it in gently with a trowel to encourage a little bit of, spreading and activity. And then added the second layer here, and added the second half of the goop to that layer. And so the only layer where I didn't add any was the very top one, because as I mentioned, that one is still a layer where I'm adding active food scraps all the time, and I kind of wanted to concentrate this in the ones that I'm going to harvest sooner. So that was the logic.
That was it. It was really simple. It was really easy. I probably looked a little crazy, and I think my blender is maybe a little worse for wear, but in the end, it was great. The biochar stabilized the moisture levels in the worm bin. We didn't have any odors, so I think it actually was a beneficial addition for the worms themselves, as well as now I'm just getting amazing castings out of that. And so when I start the seeds in that, and when I put it into my transplant bags for the fall garden, those plants now are going to be in an environment that's just completely enriched with this stable carbon that's housing just tons of beneficial life. So really, really happy with it. Highly recommend it if you've got a blender that you're willing to kind of take a risk with. This definitely works. So if you try it, let me know. And if anybody has figured out another way to work biochar in, I'd also love to hear it. I have nothing against the compost tea bubbler. I just I just wanted something a little easier. But if other people have found that there's a benefit to doing it that way versus this way, definitely share. But yeah, this is, for me at least, so far, I would say a winner. So thought I would share. Thanks.